Yes, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is, what did I just do? My name is Dimitri Broxton. I am the Senior Director of Education at MOAD. And we have Lava Thomas, who I will introduce in just a moment. Before I get into everything, I want to welcome you to I think this is our 9th installment of In the Artist Studio now. So since the museum has been closed in March, we have gone ahead and done this program. People cannot come into our physical building to see the art. So we thought we would bring the artists to you and provide this rare opportunity to visit artists within their studio. If this is your first time joining us, we have been doing this every single Wednesday at 1:00 p.m. Please look at the museum's website for more information about these. The format of today's talk will be Lava and I will talk for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then we will open up for Q&A. So as we're having the conversation, please, great question. All the talks are archived on our YouTube channel, so please look for Museum of the African Diaspora on YouTube, and you will find all of the archived talks. So as we're going through the conversation today, please feel free to insert questions in the Q&A box on the bottom of your Zoom window, and we will go through those and get through as many as we can. Also, before I start into the program, I want to make a few statements also. First of all, is that MOAD stands in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. We honor and mourn the senseless murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, and so many others who have lost their lives at the hands of police brutality and racial injustice, including those whose names we do not know. We're joining you from all over the country and from all over the world, but MOAD is in San Francisco. And we also want to acknowledge that many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those who were forcefully brought to this continent. Our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples whose lands we are located. With deep respect, MOAD acknowledges that even in virtual space, our people, our work, and our network servers are on native lands, and we thank the indigenous people of the Bay Area who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Now, the wonderful Lava Thomas, who it seems like so many of you already know her. But if you haven't, I'm going to read her bio. So Lava Thomas tackles issues of race, gender, representation, and memorialization through a multidisciplinary practice that spans drawing, painting, photography, sculpture, and site-specific installations. Drawing from her family's Southern roots, current socio-political events, intersectional feminism and African American protest and devotional traditions, Thomas's practice centers ideas that amplify visibility, healing, and empowerment in the face of erasure, trauma, and oppression. Lava Thomas was born in Los Angeles, California, and is currently based in Berkeley, California. She studied at UCLA School of Art Practice and received a BFA from California College of the Arts. Thomas is a 2019 to 2021 recipient of the Lucas Artist Fellowship Award at the Montalvo Art Center and has participated in artist residencies at Facebook Los Angeles in 2020, Headland Center for the Arts 2018, and the Jurassic Resident Artist Program. She was a 2018 Artadia finalist and in 2015 received the Joan Mitchell Grant for Painters and Sculptors. We're in the midst of greatness here. Thomas's work is included in the National Portrait Gallery's triennial exhibition, the Outwin 2019 American Portraiture Today. Her work has been exhibited in various institutions, including the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C., the International Print Center, New York, the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco, the Contemporary Jewish Museum, also in San Francisco, and the California African American Museum in Los Angeles, California. Her work is held in the permanent collections of the United States Consulate General in Johannesburg, South Africa, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, Washington, D.C., the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the MH DeYoung Museum in San Francisco, California, and the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. Thomas's work has been written about in Artforum, Hyperallergic, SF Chronicle, The Guardian, KQED Arts, the Art Newspaper, and LA Weekly. Thomas is represented by Rena Branston Gallery in San Francisco, California. Welcome, Lava, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Yes, it's amazing. I'm so impressed by you and like, geez, what do you not do and what can you not do?
I'm flattered. Thank you. I'm just a working girl.
And an impressive one. Before we jump into our questions and our comments, you know, as we're preparing for this, you reminded me that today is also the 5th anniversary of a great American tragedy, and it really seems to resonate in this time. So I thought we'd also start off with a video of an interview that you did with the Smithsonian American Art Museum. So I'm just gonna go over to that really quickly, or in theory, really quickly. Here we go.
Hi, my name is Lava Thomas. I'm here at the Smithsonian American Art Museum to speak about my work, Requiem for Charleston. When the news broke of the massacre at Mother Emanuel Church, I was working in my studio on another tambourine piece and a series of portraits of my Southern ancestors. The tambourine is an egalitarian instrument. It's an instrument that's found in cultures around the world, in religious ceremonies. It's also used as a protest instrument, particularly in protest marches during the Civil Rights Movement. My own relationship with the tambourine is a very personal one. I grew up playing the tambourine in my grandmother's church. My memories of playing the tambourine were ecstatic ones. In the case of Requiem for Charleston, that sense of ecstasy and worship services was silenced by the events of that tragic day. The arrangement of the tambourines in Requiem for Charleston is a square turned on its side so that the axis of the piece form a cross. I chose to use lambskin because the lamb is the quintessential symbol of sacrifice and innocence, used in Christian, Jewish, and Muslim traditions. I chose black lambskin because, of course, the victims of the Charleston massacre were black. I inscribed the names of the victims on lambskin using pyrographic calligraphy, where I used a burning tool that's typically used in wood burning crafts and leather crafts to write their names. It was a gesture to burn the names in one's memory, but also to recall the violence during slavery when enslaved peoples were branded. I wanted the names to be subtle. I wanted the viewer to have to move very close to the piece to be able to actually read the names and decipher what the names were. I also used black acrylic discs that reflect the viewer's faces so they actually become part of the piece as they're viewing it. I chose to leave some of the tambourines blank in memory of the many men, women, and children who've died in racial violence against churches throughout history. It's my hope that viewers walk away with some sense of, not only with a sense of grief, but with some sense of shared humanity, that this is not just an act of racial violence against Black people during a Bible study one summer evening, but that this is in fact a human tragedy that we all share and have some responsibility in preventing. The Reverend Sharonda Coleman Singleton, Cynthia Graham Hurd, Susie Jackson, Ethel Lee Lance, the Reverend DePayne Middleton Doctor, the Reverend Clemente C. Pinckney, Tywanza Sanders, the Reverend Daniel Simmons Sr., Myra Thompson.
Wow.
Oh my.
Yeah, it's deep. And, I mean, I think before we started broadcasting to everyone, we were talking about this and the relevance of this in this time. I know everyone probably needs a moment for that one. But just for me, the realization that this happened only 5 years ago, and the conversations that were being had at that time, and the connection of that church to the civil rights movement, and even just learning how churches in South Carolina, Black churches, were banned for so long. And so, coming into the civil rights movement, they became the center of the movement and were attacked subsequently. So to have this happen again, and then now seeing what's happening in our country now, it's just, it's incredible. It's incredible, and not in the best way. It's incredible and just like blows your mind. So yeah, normally I would ask you about yourself and, well, how are you doing right now after we just had, started off on such a deep level?
I'm okay. I'm thinking back to an article by Claudia Rankin from the New York, that was written in the New York Times, that appeared in the New York Times shortly after the Charleston 9 massacre. And the headline was, "The condition of Black life is one of mourning." And that has been true from the time that Africans set foot on these shores. There's been a continual war against Black lives. And now, 5 years later, we are still in a state of grief and mourning over the recent murders that have been witnessed around the world. Now, I think that we're in a different time than we were 5 years ago, and I have a glimmer of hope. If you remember, 5 years ago, that massacre was the impetus for the removal of the Confederate flag from the South Carolina State House. Today, in response to all of the murders, the ones that you've mentioned, and the ones that continue to happen, there is a global response, a global movement that insists that Black lives matter. And it's not just Black people who are out protesting. It is a multiracial, multi-generational, folks from all stripes are now insisting that there are police reforms, that there's adequate health care for Brown and Black people. I mean, the number of demands that I've seen just in social media are somewhat heartening. Okay, so, and today we see monuments to genocide, colonialism, and Confederacy being toppled all over the world, not just in this country. So the voice of resistance, the uprising, is much, much louder, and it is on a global scale and not just happening in this country. The other thing that I've been seeing in social media are all of the allies, non-Black, brown allies, who are willing to look at their own biases and their own expressions of unconscious racism, and willing to go through some kind of anti-racist training and education. We're also looking at Black professionals, brown professionals in all fields speaking out against the racism that they've experienced within the workplace. And that's something that's very different. We are on the verge of a real reckoning now. So I am hopeful, but I also realize, as I mentioned before, the war against Black lives is real. Mm-hmm. You know, if we are not in the service of providing free labor for capitalism, then this country really has no use for us. So, but this global insistence, national insistence that our lives matter, that our labor will be compensated for fairly, that we will no longer stand for and be silent when we encounter microaggressions. I mean, this voice is loud. This voice is loud and it's global. So I think that we are approaching a new day. At least that's what I hope.
I am right there with you. I'm very hopeful. I wish I could say optimistic. I really want to be optimistic about it.
I'm not optimistic.
Yeah, exactly.
And like I said, it's
yeah, exactly. There's a hope. It's like, oh, there's a seed. Hopefully it can grow. Normally I've been asking artists, how the shelter in place has impacted their work, but I think with you, your work has been, I don't want to use the word political, but your work has addressed inequities, injustices. It has addressed those who have been overlooked by history, and I think in so many ways now that's popular. Now that we're having this reckoning, people are really interested in seeking out those artists, or I've noticed on social media, artists who have never addressed it are shifting to that. Or talking about social issues and injustices. Have you seen a shift in your work? And not that I think you would need to, because it's, like I said, it's always been about that. But has this current moment impacted how you're conceiving of your work, how you're thinking about it, even how you're physically working on it?
My work has always had the seeds of activism and consciousness embedded in it. And that really does come from my being the descendant of a slave. Mm-hmm. My great-great-great-grandmother was enslaved in Decatur, Texas. My great-great-great-grandfather fought on the Union side in the Civil War. So that family history has always been with me, and I was raised by the Black women in my family and saw their struggles, their incredible work ethic, there's a word that I'm looking for. They were fierce. These were fierce women. So I've always been interested in illuminating the political voice in my work. So now I'm thinking about, I'm beginning to think about new projects. I'm a slow processor, and throughout the shelter in place, it's been a lot more difficult to work because I am a working mom. I have a son who is just going to middle school, and he was home, doing distance learning, and now it's summertime and there are no camps. So that sort of support that I had in place that made it possible for me to work, I don't have that much of that support anymore. So it's been difficult, although I have still been working. What's really interesting to me now with Black Lives Matter, especially since one of my recent projects was, and I have some portraits in the background of women who initiated and organized the Montgomery Bus Boycott, During the civil rights movement, women didn't get a lot of credit, but the movement was sexist. What can I say? So that project was really about looking at women's leadership roles and to provide a counter narrative to that very narrow sort of hero worship narrative of the civil rights movement, and to take a look at the everyday women who were responsible for the Montgomery bus boycott success. Today's movement with Black Lives Matter, women are at the forefront. There is no centralized leadership. We have social media instead of phone trees, so that information is disseminated quickly and globally. So there's been a real shift in the way that freedom movements are organized and how they are manifest in the world. So I'm continuing to look at the civil rights movement and to uncover those stories, because we still, that history, you say civil rights, you immediately go to, if there's Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, and it really is, it's a much broader history and story that really needs to be made part of the public history of that era. I'm thinking about projects I'm doing. I'm working, but the way that I work, sometimes I start with the seed of an idea and then I begin doing research and it sort of grows from there. Sometimes it's just out of the work, out of something interests me. I start drawing, I start doing some other things, perhaps experimenting a bit, reading. It doesn't always, I don't always know exactly what I'm doing in the beginning, but these are, we're living in, we are making history. These times are making history, and there's some real paradigm shifts that are happening right now that we are witnessing, that we are a part of. So I know that this period of time, and I can't think of a time when there's been both a pandemic, a virus. Right? All I can do is laugh, right? Because it's like a pandemic and social uprising, and just with the pandemic, looking at the disproportionate numbers of Black and brown bodies, and literal Black and brown bodies, just the spectacle of Black death, from the virus to the spectacle of Black death, from both police brutality and racist vigilantes. And we're not having it. We're not having it. I believe that this is an opportunity for real systemic change. I hope that 5 years from now, when we're at the 10th anniversary of the Charleston massacre and the 5th anniversary of this uprising, that I'm not saying, oh, here we are still,
Yeah, exactly. We really can't do that anymore. We can't. I was thinking about how these things have these 30-year cycles, it seems like. So I'm really there with you. I hope that it reduces down to a 5-year cycle of big monumental change happens. I would have pulled some of these out. I pulled some images to show of some of the pieces, but I think it's a little more effective to see the pieces right behind you. Do you want to kind of talk about some of those pieces for folks who haven't seen them?
Sure. So I, in my solo show that was about a year and a half ago, it included a suite of 12 portraits of women who were arrested during the Montgomery bus boycott.
I'm gonna pull up your website really quickly just to kind of show.
Okay.
Just to kind of just show the whole, I have the wrong thing.
The whole series. Okay. All right.
I'll
wait for, not that one.
No, not that one.
Go to the top. Go to the top
one, the mugshot. Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Just so folks can see the entirety of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a suite of 12 life-size portraits of women who were arrested for breaking Alabama's anti-boycott laws. And one of the women was responsible for leading and organizing it. And she wrote a memoir. And if it were not for that memoir, we wouldn't know. We really would not know these women's roles in organizing, leading, fundraising for the boycott. And the boycott led to groundbreaking legislation. It was a two-pronged campaign. The legal team of the NAACP managed to achieve a ruling that that stated that segregation on Montgomery buses was no longer constitutional. So the boycott lasted for a year, and it was extremely effective. And it didn't begin, like the popular narrative is Rosa Parks was tired, she refused to give up her seat. The boycott had been in the planning stages for years before that incident happened. So it was a sort of a perfect storm of both strategic planning and Rosa Parks, who was a longtime civil rights activist, and Rosa Parks deciding not to give up her seat. So what I have in back of me are drawings that didn't make it into that series, and these women were. I'm trying to find out about these women in particular because they were booked in a different part of the police station.
Oh, so they separated them.
They separated them, yes. And these women were not part of that first, and I'm just going to assume it was that first group. So I'm trying to find out more information about them. What's been really gratifying for me as an artist, especially an artist who does use American history as material. I've gotten emails from relatives of some of these women, and that is really the most gratifying part of what I do. To have someone reach out and say, "Oh, that was my grandmother. Here are more photographs of my grandmother and they met during the civil rights movement. I am so happy to see that she is being recognized finally." The curator and professor, Dr. Bridget Cooks, presented some of this work at the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts. And there were relatives in the audience. So the community knew these women. So even though there's really very little biographical information about them, for some of them, we only know their names. This work has made people come forward that know their stories. And so we know more about them. The other aspect about this work for me that's also gratifying is that these were everyday women. These were ordinary women who made a big difference. And so it's a way for us to see that activism doesn't require you to be your acts of activism are extraordinary, even when you are just an everyday person. Yeah,
I love that. I love,
in today's markets. Yeah.
No, I absolutely love
everyday folks
that
out
you're,
there.
that you're highlighting these unnamed, unknown folks, and then, you know, actually mining their stories from the community and then highlighting that. You know, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think folks, we grow up thinking that you have to be Martin Luther King Jr. or you have to be Rosa Parks. You have to have this extraordinary superhuman moment to be able to be a change maker. And I think your work in so many ways highlights that you really don't have to be this super person who, you know, is without any flaws or doesn't have a normal life. Your impetus for this, does this, you know, you talked about the woman that raised you, you talked about your ancestors who came as enslaved folks. What roles, histories, and narratives do your family play in your work?
That's interesting. Right now I am looking at my great-great-great-grandmother's life. My great-great-grandmother, who was enslaved and freed during emancipation, and we're celebrating emancipation on Friday with Juneteenth, just, you know, day after tomorrow. I grew up listening to stories from my grandmother about her life in Decatur, Texas. So there's all of this oral history that I have that I've been trying to corroborate. So last year was actually the first time that I visited Decatur, Texas. And I visited because the local genealogy society organized a posthumous military funeral for my great-great-great-grandfather, which was fascinating. He didn't have a marked grave, and so he received a posthumous gravestone and a formal military funeral. And I was also able to do a little more research about my family. And also, Decatur, Texas is a small town, and the Black part of town is the east side. So to look at where my family, where the history of the known history of my family originated, there are 2 streets on the Black side of town that are named for my ancestors. And apparently my ancestors owned quite a bit of property that they don't own any longer. So I'm looking at her life and looking at American history, because my family also migrated to Los Angeles in 1943 as part of the Great Migration. So those are narratives that I'm just really beginning to uncover, discovering that my great-great-great-grandmother her charge as a slave was a young white woman who was the same age as she.
Wow.
and that when this white woman married, into a prominent family, that she was given to this woman as a wedding present. I mean, some of these, so uncovering that and thinking about, I've always thought about this idea of cellular memory as it relates to epigenetics and intergenerational trauma, all those things. So that's a long that's a project that I've been working on for a while. And before digging deep into it, especially digging into the genealogy, I'd always been compelled to look at images, like archival family images, not really understanding why, but just being sort of naturally drawn to that. And now I have a greater understanding of why. Like, my great grandmother's story needs to be told within the context of American history. It's a larger story. It's a much larger story. And one of the stories that resonates today with all of the countless murders, and as I mentioned before, like the war on Black lives.
You said your family no longer owns the land. Do you know if they were dispossessed of it, or do you know any of
that's what I'm finding. That's what I'm discovering, like exactly exactly what happened. The other thing that happened was that my great grandmother essentially died of starvation, and she was swindled out of her Civil War widowers benefits. So I'm tracking
that's a deep story.
I'm tracking the financial paperwork, and then there's letters from family members that were advocating on her behalf. It's been more difficult since I haven't been able to travel and go do some of that research myself, and relying on like local folks indicator to do that work for me. The shelter in place has really made it more difficult to do that. But that's we all have stories like that if we just look hard enough, you know.
For sure. And not even, not even too far away. My family's from Louisiana, and we have those stories from the 50s and 60s. So, not even that long ago, of people being dispossessed of land, and trying to get it back is nearly impossible at this point. But unearthing those stories is not as impossible. And to be able to find out what really happened, and who knows if there will be a reckoning with it, right? Before we jump more into some of your specific works, I kind of want to go all the way back. I love to hear how artists, when you discovered that you were an artist, and also what got you into it. And if you remember that very first piece that you made where you're like, I'm good at this.
I was the kid who was always drawing or reading or playing the piano. I mean, those were the things that I really enjoyed doing, and discovered early on that I had a facility for drawing. So I feel incredibly lucky and blessed that I can do the thing that I love to do as a child. Like I think it's rare unless you can tap into whatever talent you possess early on. It's rare to know sort of what you were put on this earth to do, right? And it's even rarer to pursue that thing as a profession. So I can't remember a time when I didn't have a pencil in my hand making stick sketches, but my grandmother had a beauty shop in Los Angeles, and so she subscribed to Highlights magazine for children, and Highlights magazine for children had always had an art section. And I remember there was this one painting, Las Meninas by Velázquez. And when I was a girl, and I still am very much, I was all about the clothes.
Yes, you have amazing style.
Like the dress, it was arresting. The dress was amazing. And then to read that Velázquez painted himself in the painting.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Usually, especially as a kid, and I went to LA public schools during a time when field trips to the museum were commonplace, when visiting art, the schools were funded in such a way that visiting artists actually came into the classroom and talked about their practices and talked about their work. So it wasn't so foreign to me. But I do remember when I was in college thinking, oh my God, how am I going to make a living? How is this
right?
work? And not knowing not knowing exactly what that was going to look like. So as an undergrad, I had an internship at the Getty Museum in their conservation department. And the program was to introduce fine art majors to conservation. And I was seriously considering it because it resonated with my interest in history, my interest in family history. And I have to be honest, I absolutely loved being around the artifacts. And the Getty has quite an amazing collection. Well, at the time, Carrie Mae Weems had an exhibition. I wish I could remember, I can't remember the name of it. It was a group of photographs that were part of, I believe it was Harvard's archives of, and I hope I'm not misspeaking. There were slaves and their white charges, like slave women and their white charges. And it was in the Getty Villa. And I spent every day of my internship with that work. And it was so incredibly powerful. And at that during that summer where I was really grappling with the direction that I was going to go in, was I going to go into conservation? And there, you know, the Getty was presenting all of these wonderful opportunities. Or did I want to, you know, I wanted to make work that resonated and it was as powerful as the work that I was experiencing. So I have to say that it was a process, but seeing that experience, it wasn't just seeing, because it was a full-bodied experience. It was so powerful that I think that was really the clincher for me to sort of, okay, I'm doing this art thing.
And we're so happy that you took that very challenging path with a very murky view. Yeah. I mean, you know, somehow our time is flying today. It is. I definitely want to talk about before. I want to see your studio and see what you're working on, but I also want to talk about See Black Women. I want to hear. Yes. Yeah, and I know that's a big conversation, but you know, you and this amazing group of local Bay Area artists and thinkers and activists came up with this amazing project. And do you want to talk about?
I can talk about the origin story, because the project is ongoing, and you know, we're a fairly new collective. So See Black Women really grew out of a response to my being selected for the Maya Angelou monument that is to go in front of the San Francisco Public Library, being selected by a selection panel that consisted of, probably for the first time, a critical mass of Black women. It was the first time in San Francisco's history that a critical mass of Black women were invited to participate in a process to select an artist to honor a Black woman. So I know it's a story. Angry, you know. Good. I received the highest ranking. I got a phone call from the project manager saying that I won, and then 2 weeks later, I got a call from the chair of the Visual Arts Committee telling me that the sponsors of the project preferred a more figurative work. Now, this monument was advertised in the I don't remember which paper advertising, but it was advertised as San Francisco wanting something contemporary and forward looking. And one of the criteria for the artist selection, for the artist selected, was an artist who was proficient in portraiture, not someone who was proficient in statuary, but someone who was proficient in portraiture, which is essentially what I do. It's not the only thing that I do, but okay, I'm proficient, right? So 2 months after I got the call that the sponsors wanted something else. This is after the fact. This is even after the legislation says where statue is crossed out and artwork is put in its place. Supervisor Stephanie, one of the legislative sponsors, essentially walked in the rudest way at the Visual Arts Committee meeting and said, no, we are shutting down this project, we're starting over. And so my selection wasn't approved. So there was a meeting at Ashara Ekandayo Gallery, and it was the last artist talk. And on that panel was Dr. Lee Rayford of UC Berkeley, Dana King, who's an amazing artist who creates Black bodies in bronze, Angela Hennessy, who was on the selection panel, and myself. There was standing room only in that room, and I was invited to speak about what happened. Now, that fiasco was covered by the press, heavily covered by the press, and the Bay Area art world was outraged. And so there were letters written, but this was the first actual meeting in a space that was dedicated to the work of Black women, where I was invited to speak about what happened. And the final words toward the end of that panel that Angela Hennessy spoke were, see Black women, hear Black women, trust Black women, love Black women, protect Black women, pay Black women. So that's how this collective of artists, curators, writers, creatives, collectives, activists. I have to mention Tahira Rashid, who's she's one of the organizers, one of the founders, really rallied behind the injustice that was done by the Visual Arts Committee at the hands of San Francisco politicians. I mean, it was ridiculous. So here we are. It's a new and still forming collective, but I'm grateful for the support. These are some powerhouse women, so y'all just stay tuned.
Yes, and a very active group, that very, very visible and active group. I do want to just jump into your studio, and I feel like now, okay, let's run. What are you working on right now? And do you mind? I know you're not in your big studio.
I'm not. Yeah. So I can. Okay, good. Yeah. I'm finishing up some family portraits, and that's what I'm pointing to now. And then finishing up some portraits from the Montgomery Bus Boycott leaders who were arrested. A new piece that I have here is a masked Black woman, and looking at Black women's, both their leadership and labor during this pandemic, and thinking about how the mask has become politicized. I mean, it's ridiculous. The mask is a public health necessity, and we have folks who are refusing to wear it because they see it as a sign of weakness. And we're in the middle of a pandemic, don't forget. And then I have another drawing that is another portrait that is part of the Montgomery Bus Boycott group. So I have some other things that I've been working on that aren't for public consumption yet.
For sure.
But You know, it's busy.
It is busy.
It's busy.
You're being a mom, an artist. You're out there being an activist and speaking out against injustices. We understand. How many portraits of the Montgomery bus boycotters do you plan to make? Do you have a sense?
You know, right now, so I have the 12 that are finished, and I have 4 more. And I'm going to look and see if there are more. So they're the Montgomery Bus Boycott women, and then they're the freedom fighters. And I don't know if that's going to be a project that I'm going to take on, because there are literally hundreds of them. Yeah, I just have to, right now, I'm very much thinking about the moment that we're in and the history that has led us to this moment, and some of the images that are coming out of this current uprising.
Yeah, and powerful images. I'm going to shift over to our Q&A. I see we have a couple of questions. For folks who are joining us, please feel free to write in your questions. So this first one is pretty, hopefully you have the answer for it. The title of the memoir by the Montgomery leader. Do you know the title?
Yes, the Montgomery Bus Boycott and the Women Who Started It. And it is by, the last name is Robinson. So the Montgomery Bus Boycott and the Women Who Started It.
Awesome. Did I just see Dr. Cooks say something? I thought I just saw Bridget say something. Yes. Let me see. Hey, Bridget. And we had that same question as well. So 2 people wanted to know the question for that. Joanne
Robinson.
Yeah, someone also wants to know, so thank you from Rula. She's wondering if you could describe producing mugshot portraits. Do you work on one at a time? Are there rituals or processes that you move through to produce these portraits?
Okay, I don't work on one at a time. As you can see, I have 2 behind me. But when I was working on the series, I had them all lined up. You know, I started this project because, well, it was in response to the misogynistic and racist rhetoric coming out of the last presidential campaign. So I started looking back at the civil rights movement, and also the fact that hard-won voting rights laws and protections were being just methodically erased through voter suppression, gerrymandering, all those things. So I really needed to feel the power of these women. So I had them all, you know, I'd walk in the studio and go, yeah.
Wow. So you had all 12 of them lined up.
Yeah. And because my process is very time consuming and labor intensive, just spending time with each one of them and thinking about what they must have gone through, and the fact that their activism, their leadership, their labor is one of the reasons why we are here today. That's a powerful, a very powerful engagement.
And like, yeah, did you have any rituals that you went through?
Rituals? I have a ritual of sharpening my pencils. You know, I like a very clean space. So upon entering the studio, entering my space, there's always some clearing energetically, straightening up, sharpening pencils. I think I had an Instagram post where I was holding my pencils saying, I like them sharp. These are my weapons.
I love it. Someone does have a question about have you ever done a self-portrait? If not, will you? And so I want to pull up a self-portrait that I had intended to share. And we can
Really? Which one is that? Oh,
Are you
those,
seeing
I
it?
love those so much.
That is a self-portrait, right?
It is.
Yes.
I was in the 4th grade. Yes. So I have a few of those. Yes.
Yeah. It's beautiful, and it's also a very different medium as well. And I think for you, you're someone who works. You talk about the pencil, but you work. This one is a painting, I believe, right?
It's a painting. Yes.
Yeah, and then also, you work with the tambourines. How do you go about choosing your medium? And I'm gonna pull up a different tambourine, the one from the DeRosa.
Oh yeah, that one was.
Yeah, so just you work in so many different media. How do you go about choosing? And then with a piece like this, where it could be displayed in so many different ways, how do you do that? How do you choose?
A lot of those choices now for me, I find that they're mostly intuitive. So with the Montgomery Bus Boycott work, I didn't want to create paintings. I wanted to use a tool that's accessible, that everybody has experience. This idea of anyone can do this. Well, everybody has held a pencil. That's not really true with painting, okay? With this piece that you're looking at now, what you can't see is that it has fragments of political speeches by women and all women. This is an aspirational piece about solidarity. So there are excerpts or fragments of excerpts of speeches by Mariah Stewart, who was the first African American political writer from the 1800s, Angela Davis, Yuri Kochiyama, who was a Japanese American civil rights activist, and on and on and on and on. So, and the color really came out of what I was seeing on the screen and also in the crowds of the Women's March. Now, feminism is fraught. It is. So when I say that this is an aspirational piece, it's very much about this wish for solidarity. And interestingly, we are experiencing a moment of solidarity with Black Lives Matter.
And what were the materials? Was this also leather and acrylic?
This is leather, mirrors, plexi. What you can't see, I have light. Well, you can see a few of the lights, but you can't really see the shadows. The shadow. Oh, you can see this one much better. Yeah.
Yeah, I just did a little zoom, and so you can also see some of
the writing. Yeah, this piece is comprised of 600 tambourines. It's the largest tambourine installation that I've created to date. Yeah, and when you got close to it, you could hear the tambourine jingles because there are fans that were installed at the top of the gallery, and really thinking about sort of the echo of past marches.
I love that. Okay, so there's a movement involved in it.
There's movement, yes.
And our last question, what other artists, you mentioned Carrie Mae Weems, what other artists inspired you? We have teacher Bruna Wynn on with us, who also teaches young women who are visual artists, and so she also wants to know, who are your inspirations?
There are so many young artists. Toyin Oji Abdulada, locally, Mildred Howard. Mildred Howard is a good friend and just an incredible artist, and I would really love to see her Oh, there we are.
That sounds like I have to quickly pull up Mildred.
Maybe
not her,
see
but
all of it. I don't know if it's showing completely on the screen, but this is
not.
really an homage. This drawing is 9 feet tall, and you're looking at the back of her head. So no matter what, someone is writing and they can't see it. No matter what vantage. No matter what vantage point you are at, she's always in front of you. So it's this statement about how pioneer art, here we are. There's so many, Howardina Pendel, there's so many artists who have forged the way for those of us who are essentially riding on their shoulders. Okay, good, Here we are.
Yes. I love it.
Thomas,
Oh my goodness, the unsung heroes.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Lava. Thank you for everyone who joined us. This has been an amazing conversation. And yeah, I definitely think we needed another hour to get through everything I wanted to cover with you. But this has been phenomenal. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. You are such an inspiration. You are one of the most amazing artists, not only in the Bay Area, but in the world.
Thank you. It was really my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
And I invite everyone to please look at MOAD's website, look at our social media as well, to see about these other programs. So we are doing them every single Wednesday at 1:00 p.m. And Lava, thank you so much again. I can't wait to see you in real life.
I know, in person. I want to say one thing. Everybody, donate to MOAD. Support our Black institutions. It's so important. Thank you for having me, Dimitri.
Thank you so much. You have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right.